Okay, hi everybody. Welcome back. This is Bill De La Cruz, and I'm your host for the Origination Point podcast. And for those of you who have been listening, first of all, I appreciate that. And if this content resonates with you, be sure and share it, put it on your social media. Reach out to us with your questions or comments or thoughts about any of our guests or any of the content that you hear. As you know, if you've been a long-standing listener or if you subscribed, and if you haven't, you should do that. We basically talk to people about their stories and about how people are maneuvering through this challenging time that we're all living in on our planet, and some of the approaches that they're taking, and just hearing people's stories, because the origination point is the idea that everything that we experience as adults goes back to some point of our young time in life, from birth to high school. And so I'm intrigued by all of the folks that we have been able to interview, the stories that people have shared. And so we're just going to jump right in. I have a guest with me today. His name is Jonathon Maynard. Hi, Jonathon. How are you today?
Do great, Bill. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. And so we're just going to jump right in. I'm going to let Jonathon introduce himself and tell a little bit about who he is and how he came to do what he's doing and how we even became connected. And we'll just kind of see where our conversation goes today. So, would love for you to share a little bit about yourself and just tell a little bit of your story for our listeners.
Yeah,
Welcome.
absolutely. I am just a very just diversified person as far as kind of like my background. Grew up. My dad was in the military, so grew up moving around a little bit, and just really kind of got to experience a lot of different cultures and a lot of different things. um Went to high school, met my now wife. We've been married for 28 years. Met her in college. Kind of traveled the country with her job, and then got into entrepreneurship probably about a little over a decade ago, and built some companies, and doing that. And that's kind of what I do on a day to day. But really, and the reason I think we connected was just that the inner work that I've been doing for the past few years. It has really just changed kind of who I am and how I think about things.
Great. So, before we start with the inner work, I want to start with the word that you used about entrepreneur. And so, I think there's a whole variety of folks that are looking at wanting to have their own business or do their own thing, and for a variety of reasons, may not be doing that. Now, I would love to hear your idea and your perception of what it means to be an entrepreneur. And it sounds like for the previous, before this 10 years, when you got into entrepreneurship, you might have done something else. So maybe start with that, and then what pushed you to say, oh, I'm going to do my own thing.
Yeah. I've had a lot of different types of jobs where, your regular 9 to 5s. My primary vocation has been in information technology. So I was an IT guy. Did a lot of systems administration and network and things like that. I didn't work on the coding side, but worked on kind of hardware and whatnot. And really, my entrepreneurship journey came out of a desire just to do something a little bit different. I The first business that I had was a kettle corn business, and my family and I went up to the mountains, and we love to go apple picking, and going up there and just kind of experiencing the Virginia mountains. And there was this long line for this guy selling kettle corn, and I was a kettle corn connoisseur. I love getting kettle corn
Yeah.
everywhere I went. And I noticed this long line of people, and I was like, man, people are just lining up for this kettle corn. And you get up there, and it smells so good, and you pay $10 for this bag of kettle corn. And I thought, man, I wonder what it costs him to make that kettle corn. And so I started doing the math, and I was like, okay, maybe this is an opportunity for me to build something kind of on the side, something that I can do with my family, with my kids. And so that birthed our kettle corn company, and grew that. We did that on Saturdays at the farmers market, and we did a lot of festivals. And my kids at the time were really, they're small, and so they were out handing out samples, and we learned how to kind of just do the business. My dad was in the army. My mom was, she had various like part-time jobs, and so I didn't get to get the entrepreneurship modeled to me. So it was something that I just kind of found, and then I really enjoyed the autonomy, the freedom that it allowed me.
Mm.
And really it came down to just making the decisions. I really enjoyed going, okay, what can we do to pivot? Or maybe it's, the marketing about of the thing. So I was very interested in that. And that's really how I started that entrepreneurship journey, and then eventually sold that business to a friend of mine that wanted it to help put his kids through college. So my
Yeah.
kids at that time, they're in high school, so I didn't have to worry about the college thing yet. And he was kind of in a situation where he's like, I really need to make some extra money. How can I do that? And so we kind of come to an agreement. And I said, this is a great business. I'm tired of working every Saturday doing it, and I hadn't even thought about employees. It didn't occur to me,
Okay.
really. I kind of thought, well, nobody can do it as good as I can, and training employees are hard and things. So I've since learned a lot and realized that no, employees are really great. And as long as you bring them in the team, you give them a win-win situation, then that's really where the magic happens. So sold that, went back to, just doing my regular IT thing, and then got bit, bit again by the entrepreneur bug, really out of a need, for myself. I saw a real opportunity in the market. So I was
Mm.
trying to get my wife a Mother's Day or a Christmas gift of somebody coming and cleaning the house. I don't remember exactly which one it was. I had such a hard time finding, a company with, compassion, and somebody who would do what they say that they're going to do. And I saw a need in the market, and so I started that cleaning company and grew that, and I've started other home service companies as well. And I've got a couple right now that work in tandem, in the home service space. Basically going out and providing a service to homeowners, and that has been a tremendous opportunity to both, grow as an individual, but also help other people grow. And that's really where the entrepreneurship has come in for me.
Yeah, it's really interesting because for myself, I've been self-employed since I was 19, and I had one quote unquote real job in my 40s when I worked for Denver Public Schools for about 10 years. And part of why I did it is I wanted to see if you could change a big system like that from inside. And while I had a lot of an impact, it didn't really change the system like I wanted. And even today, I was in a conversation with somebody who said, "Don't you miss like the daily grind of the 9 to 5 or whatever?" And I'm like, "Well, I have a daily grind, but it's different, and I don't really look at it as kind of a grind in that way because I really love what I do."
Mm.
And I think part of what I like to do with this podcast is to share things like entrepreneurship, or do you have a mindset that life is just this grind that you have to get through every day? And so for me, it was more about I didn't want to be dependent upon somebody else for my paycheck.
Yeah.
And so I that was one of and continues to be the driving factor. So if I have nothing, it's because I've done nothing. And if I have a comfortable lifestyle, it's because I've really worked hard to create that. And even working hard is interesting too, because sometimes, and you may have had this experience, things just fall in my lap, and I'm like,
Mhm.
wow, okay. So the process is really just figuring out how do I facilitate it and maintain this person as a client, and it's not for everybody because sometimes those lean times that we have as entrepreneurs can be kind of scary if you're used to
Mhm.
having that constant um, paycheck and things like that. So
Mhm.
it's been really interesting. And yet the other thing I heard you say is some of your business opportunities came from not being able to either seeing a need in the market because you saw that big line of people getting kettle corn. How do I jump into that? Or from a scarcity mindset of I couldn't find somebody to do this service so I could surprise my wife. And so I went out and figured out how to make that happen.
Mhm.
And I think that's an important um, awareness because a lot of my approach to personal growth and inner growth is rooted in this whole idea of our mindset and how our mindsets have to shift to obtain the things that we want. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that and how your own mindset has either created barriers that you've had to work through or allowed you to see something that maybe someone else didn't see and you were able to benefit from it or provide benefit from it.
Yeah, sure. So, I had a real limited mindset when I had the kettle corn company because, again, going back, I had mentioned that I didn't think that anybody could do it as good as I could, and
Mhm.
and and I had a real struggle letting go of that, and and I think that was the biggest limiting factor I had in that business because, um, I really didn't know how to basically recruit, lead, manage people, and having
Mhm.
that fixed mindset of going, they can't do it as good as I can. What I've learned since is they might not be able to do it the same way that I do it, but maybe they have a better way, maybe they have a different way, and looking at it as more of an abundance mindset, more of a team mentality has been really helpful. When it comes to the service thing, when you look at businesses, a lot of times people will go, "Well, I want to do that new thing. I want to do the novel thing that nobody's ever done." And for me, if they've never done it, that's a harder hill to climb. I would rather go into a business where there's a lot of competition because that tells me there's a market. I don't have
Yeah.
to convince people that this particular thing is good or that they need it. That work has already been done. So what I need to do is figure out where their pain points are and then meet them where they're at. And the easiest way that I found to do that was just looking at competitors' Google reviews and seeing what their customers are complaining about, where they're missing the ball, and
Mm.
going, how can I fix that? How can I help that? Or if it's a product, how can you make a product a little bit better? The automobile is the automobile, but we have a lot of different automobile manufacturers and we have different models that come out every year with different features. So it's about finding the things that really help people solve the problems that they've got.
Yeah, so really it's adaptive, kind of forward thinking that you're letting your mindset get into. And it's interesting when I first started in my businesses, it was in the construction industry. And first I was doing a lot of new construction, which it didn't really matter if I hired employees who were really good at interacting with people because for the most part they were in a brand new home and the only people they had to interact with were other subcontractors. When I shifted over though to start working in the repaint market and the remodel market, I was working in people's homes.
Mhm.
And it was a little bit different because I realized that some of the people that I hired were really good at their trade and yet didn't treat my clients the way I wanted them to be treated. And so I actually had this kind of like bifurcated business where I had hired people that I could only put in a brand new house. And then I hired people that had both the professional skill and also the people skills. And I
Mhm.
found that the people skills I couldn't really train to. I could teach somebody how to do something, how to use a nail gun or how to use a paintbrush. I couldn't teach them how to be respectful or trusting and those types of things. So it was a really interesting approach. And today I do facilitation work and I work a lot in pretty emotional states with people. And it's really hard. It's not so much that I think I'm the only one who can do it the way that I want. It's just that there's a level of emotionality that goes along with it. And so that's been a little more challenging. So I've had to kind of do my own work and bring people on a little bit differently to
Mhm.
say, what's the human side of what you do? So so let's go there and talk about what have been some of your challenges or barriers and that inner work that you talked about when we first started that you've been doing. Because a lot of what I like to share with people is just have them hear somebody's stories. Everybody has something, and so what are some of your have been some of your challenges and things, and how have you what kind of that what's that inner work that you've had to do to be the person you are today?
Yes, I think the biggest thing that I had to overcome was really just self-limiting beliefs. I grew up in with a scarcity mindset. There's so many stories that I had around money, and and a lot of it, like you had mentioned earlier, comes from the childhood, and my parents. Basically gave me a narrative, and not intentionally. They weren't malicious people, they're loving, great people, but the narrative, the stories that I heard was, money doesn't grow on trees, or money's hard to make. And so really that became ingrained in me, and
Mm,
so I had a very scarce and limited mindset. And even when I was starting my business, I still had that same kind of mindset. And I think it really just came down to childhood. I know you're aware there's so much research that shows that most of our programming happens, before the age of 5 or before the age of 8. And and so when you think about that, that is such an impressionable time, and it's a time where all we're doing is just a sponge and just absorbing all these things, and that's what I did. So all of these narratives, all of these beliefs, they were basically within me, and I didn't know that they were there. I just thought that this was the way that the world was. I thought that's the way that things worked. And so for me, the turning point for me was finding a coach that really pulled that stuff out. And some of the inner work is really just a lot of meditation, a lot of things that just that will help me calm my mind, because being an entrepreneur, my mind races so much, and I have just a lot of thoughts. And and really realizing that my thoughts are just my thoughts. That's all they are. It's just thought. It's just a an electrical firing in the brain. And but I am not my thoughts.
yeah.
I am simply an observer of my thoughts. And when I really realized that and said, okay, if I'm just an observer of my thoughts, then I I don't have to be responsible for my thought, if as long as it just is a thought and it goes away. So, for example, if you have a thought of I'm not good enough, all you have to do is you just hold that thought in curiosity and go, "Well, where did that come from and why?" Instead of going down the road of, I'm not good enough. Yeah, well, here's all the things that prove that thought. And then you start thinking about that. And that's really where that meditation has helped me, because it helps me get out of that spiral of, the thought and then all of the evidence that supports that thought. So if I could take that thought, just hold it captive and just go, okay, where is that coming from? Why am I thinking that? And how do I release it? I think the biggest thing is just letting go of all of that. And that's been the biggest amount of work that I've done.
Yeah, and I think what for our listeners, what Jonathan's talking about is we all have these self-limiting narratives, and most of them are formed when we're very young. I just say between birth and adolescence or high school, and then as we grow into adults, we create what's called confirmation bias, where we actually find ways or see ways where we reinforce our self-limiting thoughts, which then lead to self-limiting behaviors and outcomes. And then we wonder what's going on out here that's creating the outcomes that I'm experiencing versus what's going on in here. And I think that's what you said. And even this idea, I know you said let it go. And I'm going to ask you how long it took you to be able to actually let something go, because it's a really easy thing to say. And yet, for all of you listening, the process of letting go, I'm sure, has been very, very challenging. Because I'll just share my perspective, and I'd love to hear yours, Jonathan, is that for for all of us as human beings, these self-limiting behaviors at some point served us. They saved us. They kept us out of situations. They served us in some way. And if we're growing and evolving, every person gets to a point where these self-limiting narratives no longer serve us, and yet we still hold on to them.
Mhm.
And I think for me, my self-limiting narrative that I got very young was that you'll never be successful, or you won't be able to accomplish anything. And that was the hardest narrative to work through and let go of, because it was embedded in me through my interactions with my dad at a very young age. And then I bought into it
Mhm.
unconsciously. And so for me, it was being really conscious of it, that that narrative is limiting what I'm willing to do. And I don't have to hold on to it anymore. And yet the process of letting go is has to be rooted in awareness and forgiveness and acceptance, and then creating something new. That's the beauty of it, is
Mhm.
as you go through those steps, then you create something that really does serve you. So I'm curious for you, Jonathon, what was the process that you had to go through, um, to be in a place of really being able to let go of those, even though, as you said, the narratives weren't given to you in a mean way or in an intentional way. It was just, it could have just been, gosh, we don't have enough money for that, or we can't afford this, or
Mhm.
no, 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 I told you that money doesn't grow on trees, But curious the process that you use to get to that place of understanding and then being able to let go, and what did you replace it with?
Sure. So with a lot of it, and this is with any kind of narrative that I've had, it's a first I call it the Popeye moment. So it's like I've stand out like a sand and I can't stand anymore. So you come to that point where you're like, okay, I am fully aware that this is not serving me in the way that I want it to serve. And going back to what you said, my coach says this all the time. Everything we do serves us, whether we like it or not. It
Yeah.
serves us in some way. And so, first was going that the first step is awareness, and then think of it like this: like the letting go. It's not as easy as people say, especially for people that have kind of are crossing the bridge or kind of on getting to the other side of things. Sometimes we sound a little too reductive and we go, "Oh, just let it go," and it's almost flippant for those people that are kind of at the beginning, look back and they're trying to let go, and they're just like, "Well, it's not as easy as he says. What he must, what's going on?" And so there's a disconnect there. So for me, it's kind of like holding on to a ball that's really sticky. And so you just turn your hand over and you let go. Well, that thing's going to cling to you for a while. And it's going to
Mhm.
stretch out and you're going to have tentacles and things like that. So letting go is a process and it's a very long process. And sometimes we reach down and we grab it and we pick it back up. But if you turn it over again, it's less sticky. And so it's that time that really helps you let go, and the process is really just that awareness. So the first thing I like to talk about is the awareness. So if you have awareness around it, and then if you have awareness around the thoughts, when those thoughts creep up, you learn to work through them and say, okay, how is this serving me, and how can I get a better outcome? And so something if you think about like what I talked about, the um I'm not worthy. That was a narrative that I had for so
Mhm.
long. And sometimes I look back and I'm like, have I fully let go of this? Because there are times and it's mastery. I don't think you ever get to the point to where you're fully just zenned out and everything is great until you reach,
Yeah.
that Christ consciousness or something that seems almost unattainable, even though it is attainable. It's that progress, and it's getting better every day. And I think that was the key. And then realizing that this isn't a one and done. It's not like you just put a coin in a slot and you pull a lever and you're cured and everything's great. It is work, and through meditation, through breath work, and through these different practices that have been very intentional. Because I dabbled, when I first had that Popeye moment, I'm like, I'm going to let go. I dabbled with meditation. I dabbled with breath work. And then I realized hang on, until I get serious about this and make it a daily practice that whether I feel like it or I don't, I know that I need to do these things. That was the key. So it was consistency and awareness.
And what else I heard you say is that it doesn't always just go away and never recur, that those thoughts can still come in. Even I have this approach that it's about practice and not about perfection. And I
Mhm.
don't even know what that means. Or people ask me, well, when will I know I'm there? And I'm like,
Do you
that's
get there?
an interesting question, because I don't know what there looks like. I think for me, taking limiting narratives, it was more about they have less and less um, activation in my life. And
Mhm.
so it wasn't that they never go away. Sometimes, even in the last month, as my work has been shifting, and one of my clients is kind of offering me less work because of circumstances changing, I could easily go to a mindset about, well, what is it about me? And I've done that a couple of days, but I've been able to then say, wait a minute, this isn't about you. It's about the shifting landscape of what you're doing. And maybe some of it is because you've so equipped these people for success that they don't need you anymore. And
Mhm.
so shifting even that mindset and being patient. And so really what I think we're talking about, for those of you who are listening, is that each of us has to evaluate the limitations of our narratives, and then think about, how are they holding me back versus what's wrong with the world? Why is the world against me? Because that's more of that woe is me victim mentality.
Mhm.
And so you've used meditation and coaches and awareness, and so how do you treat yourself today when one of those limiting narratives pops up?
So for me, it's a just stop, breathe, just and it's usually just a cleansing breath. It's just and then I try to go, okay, what triggered that thought? And if I can find the root, that's great. But what I don't want to do is just dwell on it too much because you just treat it as a thought and it's about you can let it, my I had a mentor that told me this one time. He said, you can let a bird fly into your head, just don't let it build a nest. And so it that thought can flutter through, and if you take the thought, you don't entertain it, and you let that thought go. It's way easier to let a thought go than it is to let a complete narrative about yourself go. So
Mhm.
that really, if I get one of those thoughts and I go, ooh, I'm not good enough, or nobody likes me, or that client doesn't like me, or this happened, therefore it must be me. I just, now it's that awareness that happens immediately, and that was through the practice. So it took a while, almost I would say a year or so, before I really could capture that thought in the moment. It was always like after I would spiral down, I would
Mhm.
go, what happened? And so I would have to do this like post spiral, like decompression. And then now, as I've continued to do the work, as soon as that thought, it's like I can capture it in real time and adjust in real time. And then now it's almost like I can almost feel it coming up, and then I could just let it go before the thoughts or before those feelings start to really manifest. I could just, okay, and just let it go,
Yeah.
because I know it's not about me. I know that if I'm experiencing something negative, it's because of something that's happening here, generally not something that's happening on the outside.
Yeah, and it sounds like that's been an evolution for
Oh, yeah.
you. And for somebody who's just starting out, even though we say don't entertain the thought, you almost have to entertain it
Mhm,
to begin with, because you have to become aware of what that limiting narrative is.
mhm,
And then think about what are the results that it's getting for you.
mhm,
Because if it's not getting the results that you want, then it's really limiting you in terms of whatever it is that you want to achieve, whether it's just having a peaceful life or writing a book or starting your own business or having a healthy relationship. And so I think that that's an evolutionary process that even for
Mhm.
me, I didn't start out just going, okay, let me just pull this thought in and I'm going to let it go and be really grounded. It was like even what I explained to you about work shifting right now in my life, I had to really take it in and then ground myself in, okay, so, but what's really real? And
Mhm.
so the other piece I'm hearing from you, for those of you who are listening, is you have to create some structure to be able to deconstruct these limiting narratives. So it's not just willy nilly that when it happens, you actually go, okay, I just had this limiting narrative. I need to do X, Y, and Z. I need to write it down or talk to someone about it. I need to explore my own life and think about, am I extrapolating it to what's happening out here and being a victim, or am I owning it and taking people through some steps? So what are some of the steps that you've had to create to go through this? And I know that as we practice these steps more and more, they become less something that we have to think about and become new behaviors. So when you first started this, what was kind of your process between awareness and then a different action?
So it really came down to habits.
Mm.
And it's really making the habits work. It's so easy to say, I want to start a meditation practice, or I want to start a breath work, or a journaling practice. Journaling is also amazing. Um, and it's about the habit, and we all have this idea that, okay, if I can muscle through something for 21 days, I have a new habit. That's actually based on some really faulty, actually some good research, but a faulty conclusion from research had nothing to do with habits.
Hmm.
I actually believe it takes about 63 days to build a habit. It's actually 3 21-day chunks. So your first 21 days, you're just white knuckling it and you're getting through it. And that's where, most people will get to, and then they get to day like 22 and they're like, okay, I must have a habit now. And then things fall apart. Well, the first
Yeah.
part is terrible because you're really white knuckling. You're trying to figure it out, and you're failing. You're failing through these. Imagine, if you want to lose weight, or if you want to start that practice, whatever habit you're trying to build, you're going to fail in that first 21 days typically. And first was having the grace, and having grace and saying, okay, well, let's just continue. Because so many times, especially diet is one of the ones, because a lot of people really, they just want to lose weight or whatever, and they will make a mistake, like, eat a piece of cheesecake or something like that for lunch, and then they go, "Well, today's done," and then they just completely, eat
Yeah.
garbage for the rest of the day, and then they go, "Well, it's Tuesday, so let me just start next Monday," and then they eat like garbage, and then Monday comes, and then your kid's sick, and all these things get in the way.
Yeah.
So it's about having that grace of saying, "Okay, I had a hiccup. How do I get through this?" So that first
Yeah.
21 days, and then the next 21 days is a stride. This is really where you're really finding your footing, and then that last 21 days is where you lock it in. So for me, it was that practice of that habit. And so I love this thing. James Clear talks about this in his book Atomic Habits. He calls it habit
Yep.
stacking, where, for example, if you want to journal and you have a habit that's a good habit, say you like to have your morning cup of coffee. Well, if you put your journal right in front of your coffee pot, then you're more likely to see that, because your habit is to go to the coffee pot. You've got your journal. Then, okay, well, I'll journal while I'm having coffee. Or maybe it's you want to read a book and at night, instead of doom scrolling on your favorite social media app.
Yeah.
Maybe you put the book on the pillow of your bed,
Yeah.
because you've got to touch it, you've got to move it, so that habit will be more apparent to you.
Yeah. So there's a lot of intentionality around
Yeah.
that. And I know with Atomic Habits, it's about doing small things consistently. So
Mhm.
it's not so magnanimous that you drop it. So, like, if I decide to go out to lunch and have that piece of cheesecake at lunch, I just tell myself, well, I'm going to recalibrate throughout the day
Mhm.
versus now I've blown it. I'm just going to, pig out on anything that I want. I can recalibrate that day and just get back on track right away. So, and I don't feel guilty about it or shame myself or
Yeah.
judge myself. And I think that's when people go to that level of shaming or blaming or judging themselves, that's another form of a limiting narrative that,
Yeah.
oh, I'm just not good enough. And that's why I did that. And that's so these are all really great tips for you who are listening to think about. The intentionality around change is really important, and
Mhm.
for everyone it's going to be different. For some, that putting your journal in front of your coffee pot, great way to do it. I think the other part of this is when you're disrupting patterns, you have to create new patterns. And so that's part of, I think, what I'm hearing you say, Jonathan, is that if I really want to journal in the morning, putting my journal in front of my coffee pot is a new pattern versus
Mhm.
having my journal in my bedroom and my coffee in my kitchen. Obviously, they're not going to ever connect.
Mhm.
So, so I think that's another piece that is really important is how do we disrupt those patterns? And just curious, what was your experience like that in disrupting what felt good and right or our default patterns to create these new patterns of behavior?
Yeah, it for me, it came down to just having grace, having grace for those hiccups. And I was an all or nothing kind of person. Like, for example, when I, this was years ago when I had that Popeye moment where I was like, I'm just not happy with myself. I'm not happy with my life. I'm not
Mm,
happy with the way things are going. So I was like, okay, I need to start yoga, meditation, journaling, blah, blah. I had this whole list of things. So I went and I bought this very fancy yoga mat. I bought, this very nice journal. I bought all these things that I was like, okay, I'm all in. And then nothing happened. And so it's like just pick one, pick
yeah,
something, and then start integrating that into your life. Because if you try to change too much too fast, that's where you can fail. Not saying you're going to fail, but that's where I failed in the past because I was trying to do too much too soon instead of going, okay, I'm going to do one thing. Maybe that's that journaling thing. And like you said, you've got to break. You have to have a pattern interrupt, and that's
yeah,
how marketers do it. Whenever they're marketing to us, is they use a pattern interrupt. And so it's something that is completely out of the normal that we're used to seeing, and then we
yeah,
we stop and it grabs our attention. And that's really what we're looking for is what is that thing that's going to grab our attention? So if we can find that thing, and like it could be the bed on the pillow, the book on the pillow, or the
yeah,
thing in front of whatever that thing is, just interrupt your normal system of belief. Because really, if there was a study done and it said we have like 80 or 90,000 thoughts per day. And I don't know who counted those, but that must have been a tedious day, somebody counting thoughts. But they say that 80% of the thoughts that we have today are the same thoughts we had yesterday.
mm,
And so if you can really start changing those little by little and really interrupting our patterns, our
mhm,
programming, the things that we do on autopilot, that's really where the most success that I found is
yeah.
by breaking those things up.
Yeah, there's some other research that says that through all of our senses, we take in millions of pieces of information every second, and we only will remember about 40 of them.
Mhm,
And so that's where being aware. And the other piece, the way that I frame the change process is called daily practices. And so a daily practice is something that you do with hyper awareness for a short amount of time. So if I haven't journaled in years and now I say I want to journal, not only am I going to create access to my journal, I'm going to put everything aside and I'm going to just start with 5 minutes and say, for 5 minutes, I'm just going to journal. And I am hyper aware of what I'm doing. And I'm just either going to have a stream of consciousness or I might write a question out to myself and just write for 5 minutes and then I'll put it away. And then the
mhm,
next day, I'll tell myself, today I'm going to write for 7 minutes or 10 minutes. And this daily practice, the most important part of creating a new practice is the hyper awareness. So you do it for a short amount of time with hyper awareness. Because to Jonathan's point, you can go out and buy a really fancy yoga mat and meditation apps and a fancy journal. and be so overwhelmed you don't even know where to start.
Yep.
So even if you're doing yoga, do yoga for 15 minutes.
Mhm.
There's so many free things on YouTube to do yoga. So the point, I think, that what we're both saying is to shift practices by doing something intentional and for a short amount of time, and then over that time frame, whether it's 20 or 30 days. What I tell people is that for me, when I shift practices over a period of a couple months, it becomes a new behavior.
Mhm.
And now I've just kind of, through a daily practice that I've extended over time, and it doesn't even feel onerous because I'm working in maybe 10 or 15-minute blocks of time. And then I know that it's starting to shift to a new behavior because when I don't do it, I miss it.
Mhm.
And so I think that's really important, for that change process. So, wow, it's been a really great conversation.
Yeah.
Would love, just as we start to close down things, are there any last um, approaches or ideas or things that you really want to share to our listeners that maybe you haven't talked about or that you want to go just a little bit deeper in before we start to conclude?
Yeah, I think, the biggest thing is don't go it alone. Find a coach if you can't find a coach or that's not, in a budget or anything like that for you, a mentor, an accountability group. Find a group of people to take this walk with you because that first of all, you're going to learn more that way, and second, you're gonna be lifting each other up, and that is absolutely huge because really this type of work is it's not easy. It's difficult, and finding people that have been there, done that is absolutely important.
Great. So, how do people find you if they want to reach out to you or further this conversation with you, or if they live in the area where you do home services?
Sure. So the best way to get me is I've got my website, jjmaynard.com. You can find me on all socials at I am Jonathan Maynard. And yeah, that's the best way. Or you can just email me at hello@jjmaynard.com.
Great. Well, you've been listening to Jonathan Maynard, and we've had a really great conversation just about growth process and the things that he's been through. And as you're listening to this, as I said, if the content resonates with you, share, subscribe. You can go to my website at delacruzleadershipsolutions.com. We do both individual and group coaching. And I think the most important piece is whatever and however you choose to approach your growth process is to, as Jonathan shared a number of times, do it with grace and compassion, and really love yourself for taking those steps, and know that you're not alone. That we're building a community of people that can have these conversations and support each other, and that's another way that the origination point is bringing people together to have these conversations. And so, really appreciate you listening, sharing, and giving us feedback about our content. And also, would love to hear about what are some of the things that are working for you in terms of some of the practices that we've been sharing over the last few years around the growth process. So, thanks again, Bill De La Cruz, your host for the Origination Point. And the last thing I'll say is, most importantly, keep growing.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Jonathan.